So desal is not cheap water. It's expensive water. You only use desal if you have no other source. So there are places in the world that have to have desal if they're going to have very much water. So desal is not really an option. And the expense is largely the energy. It takes a lot of energy to purify water. So energy is not something that's easy to get your hands on either. It's expensive to produce. So we are not really looking at desal as a long-term solution right now. Besides that, of course, environmental impacts, no matter how you gather water, you're going to have impacts. It's just a matter of how bad the impact is and how easy it is to mitigate it. So desal is not something we're working toward right now. Any questions? I could not have covered this subject that well. Yes?
Who owns the water from the State Water Project, or how is that ownership allocated?
The State Water Project has customers. MWD is one of the customers. There's a water agency in the Antelope Valley that's a customer. There are other water agencies, mostly wholesale water companies, water agencies are customers of the State Water Project. Cities are customers. Districts, there are contracts. There are long-term contracts that those customers made with the state in order for the state to justify building the project. They had to have an assured long-term customer base. So the customers on the State Water Project are largely irrigation districts and water districts that are wholesalers. So the state owns the water until the customer takes it and pays for it. And they generally own the water until the end of the aqueduct, although there are customers along the way. But most of the large customers in Southern California are after the aqueduct has actually reached its terminus. Yes?
Yeah, you were talking about the appropriative rights, and I'm curious what's going on in the state, because obviously that's in conflict with the idea of conservation. So the need to use it or lose it, right? It's the use it or lose it problem. So what's going on in the state to help resolve that conflict?
I don't know the details. In fact, I was not listening to the news much over the weekend. I know the state legislature was being held, to consider what to do about state water resources in general. I don't know specifically about those kinds of, resolving those kinds of things. I do know that about 80% of the water that's moved in California in systems, Central Valley Project and the State Water Project and so forth, is used for agriculture. Only about 20% is used for cities. Agriculture in California, they pay about between 5 and 10% as much as urban water users pay for their water. So there's not nearly as much incentive for them to conserve as there is for urban users. And if they don't take the water, that's what you're talking about, appropriative water rights. If they don't take the water, they may lose it. So they don't, it's not, another reason it's not in their interest to conserve, because then they won't have as much later on to use. And California agriculture, there are two crops in particular that are grown that are very water intensive that may be better off grown somewhere else, and those are rice and cotton. So California, because of its cheap water, we actually have, the United States has the cheapest food in the world. If you look at how much food costs compared to income, we have very, very cheap food. And the reason we have cheap food is we subsidize our water. And the farmers, the reason the water is cheap is because the federal government is subsidizing it. The federal government subsidizes it because they have they have money from the taxpayer. So that's kind of, you can have cheap food, but in order to have cheap food, you have to have other things that are also cheap, in particular water. Speaking of water and cost of water, a few years ago I thought it would be interesting to find out what can you buy that's cheaper than water? Okay? And it turns out there isn't anything you can buy that's cheaper than water. You've all heard of the phrase dirt cheap, right? It's a common idea that dirt is not very expensive. I did some research. If you want to get a comparable amount of dirt or sand or gravel, Those are the three cheapest things next to water. You have to get a large load of it delivered all at once. I'm talking about like a homeowner. So you have to get a truckload delivered all at once. And it's going to be 20 times as expensive as the same quantity of water. And the water's delivered to your tap. You don't have to get it all at once. You can get it a cup at a time or a gallon at a time or any amount that you want at a time. And not only can you use it for anything you want, all of it is treated so that you can drink it. Even though 95 or 97% of it never comes close to being consumed, it's almost all used for, bathing, irrigation, flushing your toilet, and so forth. So the department goes through a tremendous amount of trouble, so to speak, to supply water, all of it drinking water quality, when very, very little of it is drunk. And it's not cheap, but it is the cheapest thing you can buy. Other questions? Yes? Yes. Why do lawsuits take such a long time? It's because one of the reasons is a lot of lawsuits can be settled quickly because what's at stake is not so important. It may be just money, but water is more important than money because there's only so much of it. You can't go out and make water. The supplies that are there are more or less fixed, and so people are not willing to give up. They're not willing to settle. And that's one reason why lawsuits drag out. Most lawsuits, settle because it's in the party's interest to not drag it out. But water is so precious, so limited, that lawsuits do not end up settling. There's one lawsuit that was